Okay, here we are, Sunday morning. Let's review the story, why we celebrate Easter. This is the Christian story of Easter. We're not going to get into the Zoroastrian story or the Mithraism or anything like that, although there is one that does match. That's why we call it Easter, because we pick up the name Ishtar, and that's a special celebration in and of itself. And that's why we have eggs and Easter bunnies and all those prolific little items like that. But we won't get into that for right now. We're going to talk about the Christian story. In the Christian story, a lot has just happened this week. And you know, I think it's amazing because in this particular Easter, it coincides with the story of the Passion very much. Passion is being the story of what happened during this Easter week. You know, Jesus came into the city on what we now call Palm Sunday. He came in, and that began the season of Passover. He goes to the temple to do his obligations there, to pray and worship, just like everyone else had done. He goes there and he sees first of all, he comes into the city on a donkey, on a lowly animal, as opposed to coming in on a prancing steed, a wonderful horse of some kind, or an elephant, which many of them did at that time, or a camel. He comes in on a donkey, a little beast of burden. And it probably was kind of a funny looking sight because it was so small, and here he was, a grown human being. He probably had to lift his legs up to the side or something like that in order to ride this little tiny thing coming into the city. And he does. He comes in. The followers of him adore him so much that they rip branches off the trees and take off their cloaks and lay them before him, and they say wonderful praising things about him, and they send him in. And the powers that be, the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the other sects of what we would call conventional religion of Judaism, don't like that at all. They think it's showy and silly and whatever else they think. And they tell him, make these people stop. And he says something to them that's very cryptic. He says to them, if I were to quiet these people, then would the very rocks cry out. Wow, I always like that. I've done talks on it, and I've heard songs written about it. But anyway, so going on with the story, then he goes to the temple, and the first thing he sees in the temple is all of these people coming in to buy sacrifices. And they're buying doves, and they're buying whatever they can afford to sacrifice. And they're going to give these to the priests, and the priests are going to kill these animals and sacrifice, because the belief in that time that you couldn't really appease God unless there was blood sacrifice. So they're doing this. They don't kill themselves or anything, so instead they pick some animal to kill, an unblemished animal, a perfect little dove or a perfect little lamb or so forth. And they're doing it this way. Well, he notices that in order to buy these things, because these people didn't want to carry them from all over the place, that they are going to buy them with whatever monies they have. And to do this, they couldn't use outside money. They couldn't use just the general money that they had been using, or they couldn't make a barter trade of some sort. So instead, what happens, they have to go to these money changers. And the money changers were cheating them. And Jesus sees them being cheated and knows this. So the first thing he does is he gets angry and leaves indignant. Goes, as the story tells us, and fashions a whip. Can you imagine what was going through his mind as he's doing it? Well, when I get this job done, I'm going to go back there and I'm going to, who knows what sort of thoughts went through his mind. I don't think he was the calm Jesus that we often think about, who was just sitting there with this pious look upon his face, folding these things, or suddenly saying, let there be, and a whip came into his hand. The Bible tells us that he fashioned it. He took the time and held on to this disdaining anger that he had long enough to do this. Then he goes back, and what does he do? He starts whirling this thing around his head and driving them back for fear of getting smacked with this whip. And as he gets closer and closer, he starts turning over the tables. And he says, there's a den of thieves in my Father's house. Well, the people, the powers that be, really didn't like that, because that's a lot of where profit came from. That's where they made a lot of money, in this exchanging of money and the sort of, not really giving them, they're shorting them. They were giving them short shrift, as we say. So he didn't like this, and he stopped it, and when he did, it was very much like the joke where the man is up there preaching, and he's saying, now those of you who are out there who do too much drinking, you know you're going to have to stop that. And everybody in the congregation says, amen. And he says, and those of you who are out there fooling around with other people's wives, you must stop doing this. And everybody says, amen. And then he says, and those of you who are holding money back from the church and not giving your full tithe, you must stop doing this. And somebody stands up and says, well, you were preaching, now you've gone to meddling. That's sort of the way they felt. He'd gone to meddling. He was stepping into the business of the church. And so they immediately said, we're going to figure out a way to stop him. We're going to get him arrested. We're going to have, something's going to happen to him, and we're going to eliminate him from everything, because too many people are starting to listen to him. And it's changing the way things are going on, and that means we'll lose our power, and we don't like that. We've got to stop him. So they thought, and they thought, and they thought, and they thought, what can we do to stop him? Well, it just so happens that one of his disciples, in talking to him, had said, look at this wonderful church that Herod has built, this wonderful temple that has been built here. Look at the size of the stones that were used to build this. And then Jesus supposedly is reported to have made this remark. I could tear this whole place down and rebuild it in 3 days. I could tear down the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Well, he's speaking, of course, something else entirely. But it's taken to be a literal meaning that he is ready to cause insurrection in Judaism. And that he has spoken against the government, because that's the two were linked together at that time. It was a theocracy. So because of that, they thought, we've got our crime. He's claiming insurrection. We can get him arrested as someone who is making this claim. And so he gets arrested. Before he gets arrested comes the final day of Passover. At that time, they have what we now call the Seder dinner. And at this dinner, he brings all his disciples together. And some say one thing of what the dinner held. John, in the Gospel of John, says that he fastened a loincloth around himself and got down and washed the feet of his disciples, trying to show them that if you want to follow me, you must be a servant, as opposed to being a leader like we've always seen described. My kingdom is about service. It's about humbling yourself. And so he's teaching them this. They have the dinner, and then the scriptures tell us that they went forth into the night singing songs of Zion. In other words, they were singing hymns. They were just out singing these wonderful hymns that they all knew by heart. And then they go out, and then he is betrayed with a kiss, and we know the rest of the story from that point on. He goes to Pilate. Pilate hears him, decides, I find no fault with this man, turns him back over to the crowd, and the crowd says, give us Barabbas, who is a thief. Give us him instead. And Jesus takes his place. So forth. Now that's the story. That's the way the story goes. He's hung on the cross. He suffers violently. I mean, it's just an awful, awful way to die. He dies, is taken down from there, and laid in a tomb. The Passover is coming, so they hurriedly put him in the tomb before Passover. Now, so here's something very interesting, I think, and Melanie and I talked on the telephone about this. The first people that came to him to minister to him on this Sunday morning are women. And you might say to yourself, why? Why was it women? Because in Judaism, it forced a man who touched a dead body to be considered unclean, but not a woman. It's been going on a long time, isn't it, ladies? A long time. So they came, and they were going to anoint his body and make sure that everything was proper for him and clean him up from this terrible, terrible thing, because they rushed him into the tomb and didn't even clean him up very well. And they go in there, and there's nobody there. Now, here's where the story jumps in all of our minds. There's nobody there. The story that we're told in Christianity is that he arose. Our minds immediately do what minds do. We start questioning. How can that be? What really happened? Do you suppose? And we go through all of these different. Now, we're no different than the people of that time. The Romans, who had put him in the tomb and had put guard on him to keep anybody from stealing his body, the Romans questioned whether or not somebody had stolen his body, taken it away, and now we're going to start this rumor that he had risen from the dead. Because they'd heard the rumor too, that he said he was going to rise again. Well, something happens, somebody falls asleep or something happens because he's not there. Can't you just imagine what happened to the soldiers who were supposed to be guarding the tomb? Can't you just imagine what happened to them? I'm not even sure I want to know what happened to these poor guys. Now, that's neither here nor there. Because the conventional mind says nobody comes back from the dead. The conventional mind says that. The conventional mind also existed in the disciples, who when the women came forth and said, we went to the temple and he's not there, he is arisen. An angel or a young boy of light said to them that he is arisen. He is risen from the dead. And the disciples immediately said, huh? What? I've got to see this for myself. They rushed to the tomb, and he wasn't there. They weren't sure what happened at all. What was their immediate reaction to all that? Fear. Fear was their immediate reaction. It wasn't joy over the fact that he wasn't there. It was fear. It was, oh, no. What's going to happen to us? Okay, so that was the story. Then the story goes on and says that he met them again. Some stories say he met him in one location, some in another. Some says that they were hiding out in a house, and the same place supposedly where they had had their last supper together, this upper room. And they were wondering, what are we going to do? Or what are we going to do? And so forth and so on. And then he just appeared to them. Now, these stories are all written after the fact, so let's just put them aside for a moment and talk about what happened on that time, that Sunday morning, when he wasn't discovered. And let's take a metaphysical view of that so that we can make this personal about us. There isn't a one of us who haven't started on a spiritual journey, who haven't learned and began to teach on this spiritual journey, that physically haven't had people come up to us and say, who do you think you are? Especially in our families. I know you. I've seen you. What's changed about you? What makes you think you're special. And the persecution begins. And oftentimes, we buy right into it, just as the men did, and have fear. Now let's take this a step further. When each one of us awaken to the Christ within, each one of us think about this as being something other than who we really are. We all think of it as being something that came from the outside to the inside. And it takes us a long time to get our personality self out of the way, which has been controlling our life for so many years, 20, 30, 40, however long it might have been for each one of us when we awaken to this idea. And we finally come to a startling conclusion. Jesus isn't the one. He is one of the ones who pointed to the one. And it exists within me, as the Bible tells us, Christ in you, the hope of glory. This isn't something that comes from outside of you into you. This is something that's always been there, lying sort of dormant, that you weren't aware of, because you were too busy trying to function in the outer, in all these different ways, trying to function in a conventional way. We all have within us the Pharisees and the Sadducees in our thinking nature. And the thinking nature is how we represent things when we're talking in metaphysical terms. The thinking nature in us is represented all throughout Scripture and everything else as men, the masculine side of us. Now, that doesn't mean that only men are able to think. It means that each one of us carry within us the idea of a thinking nature. And each one of us have a feeling nature. It is our feeling nature which recognizes the Christ presence alive forever in us. It goes, this feeling nature goes into the darkness, just like we do in meditation, and discovers that the tomb, the death, is gone. It's empty. It means nothing. Once we get past that, then we realize something eternally alive is within me. Something eternally alive. Now, to our thinking nature, which has been functioning in the outer and living in our personality self, it immediately goes into a sense of fear. Oh my gosh, what if I lose control? What will I do then? What will happen to me then? And all those fingers in the outer that are pointing at you because you are trying to function from your Christ self. All those people, all those thoughts within yourself, the doubts you have. How can it be? It can't be me. Look at all the things I've done. It's not about doing. It's about thinking and recognizing and owning your Christ self. That's what Jesus did. He sat there and he thought for so long, you know, people are waiting on a Messiah, waiting on a Messiah, waiting on a Messiah. And he flipped it and realized the Messiah I'm waiting for is me. That's the only way it's going to happen, one person at a time. And so he tried to awaken each person in his day. He even went so far as to say, I am going so that you can do greater things than I have done. And you can't as long as you're still thinking it's outside yourself. You've got to get to the place where you know that it's an inside job. It comes from within you. Not somebody else doing it for you. It comes from within. Once you realize this and own it, then you can rush back through your feeling nature, through the feminine nature within each and every one of us, that feeling nature, who recognizes it first. The feelings can rush back into the men in you, the thinking nature, and say, change your thoughts. Change it. It's now true. It's real, and this is the actual reality of what's going on. Eventually, our thoughts do awaken to this. Eventually, our thoughts, our thinking nature, eliminates the fear that it had, the doubt that it had, and we can own it. And when we do, we have arisen. We have risen to a new reality beyond thinking and feeling, beyond that. We no longer rely on thought alone to try to cope with the world. We no longer rely on feeling alone to try to manipulate others by, this is one that I got a lot when I was growing up. You know, kids are really sensitive to things around them. And I'd go to one of the adults that I'd see with maybe they were just deep in thought, but I thought they were sad. And I would go up to them and I would say to them, "What's wrong?" And they would say to me, "Oh, nothing." You ever get that? Or a sibling can do this, or a spouse can do this. "What's wrong? What's going on?" "Oh, nothing." This is what we do for so long. We deny. But eventually, we accept all that and we realize this isn't about coping, this isn't about manipulating, this is simply about being. True being. And to feel this true being, we've got to eliminate all this other stuff. Eliminate the doubts. Eliminate all that. To believe that somebody can suffer such a horrific death and be alive again goes against everything that our thought nature and our feeling nature has been taught. And yet these people believed that and went on to form one of the greatest religions there ever has been. Now that too has been manipulated over the years and changed and so forth, but that story exists in the outer in one form, but exists in the inner of us in a true form once we get past all the other stuff. When that happens for us, then the very rocks, the stumbling blocks in our lives, cry out and recognize where we need to go to get the truth, where we need to go to awaken and to overcome anything in life. And that's the real story. The overcoming of the final obstacle. That which seems so undeniably real. Dead is dead. That's the way, we pushed him, we did everything to him, he didn't say a word. He's dead. Maybe we need to look at it a different way. Maybe we just need to say, that which kept him alive in our presence is gone, and now is assimilated into every one of our beings. When that happens within us, we feel a truer, deeper connection. We feel like something that has been missing in our lives is now there. The hole that the wind was blowing through us in the middle of us is full once again. And who we truly are now emerges forth. Arise again. This is Easter morning for each and every one of us. Say to yourself, I am alive. I live. And that's all there is. The end and the beginning. God bless.